All right, so we are so excited to talk to everybody about building authenticity and inclusivity from the ground up. In the interest of time, we're going to forego the Q&A session for this panel, so if anybody has any questions or want to talk to anybody further, feel free to find us and we can connect directly. Oh, can't hear me.
Yeah, really close, yeah.
Better, okay, cool. Okay, so my name is Rachel Nobles, and I am the Platform Sales Director with GroundTruth. Thank you. So if anybody's not familiar with GroundTruth, we are a media platform who turns real-world behavior to things like visits or purchase data into marketing that drives real business results. A really key theme that I've noticed with all these talks is connecting with your audience and connecting with your ideal consumer. So what GroundTruth does is we're able to help you identify who your ideal audience might be based solely off of where they're going in the real world. I'm joined on this panel today by four really amazing people I'm excited to introduce. So we have Candace Barnes, who is the VP and Global Head of Diversity, Talent, and Culture at Papa John's. Lina El-Beshbeeshy, Global Brand Director at Newell Brands. We have Eric Hughes, Senior Director of Multicultural Marketing at Ally Financial. And last but not least, Jwesley Johnson, Marketing Manager, Belonging and Audience and Store Experience Marketing at Target. So I would love to turn it over to each of you and allow you to introduce yourselves, talk more about your current role. And then also, I would love if each of you could kind of share your unique perspectives on what does authenticity and inclusivity mean to you. So Erica, we can start with you.
Sure.
Thank you, Rachel. Good morning, everyone. I'm Erica Hughes, and I currently serve as the Senior Director of Multicultural Marketing at Ally Financial. For those who don't know, Ally is a digital financial services company with the nation's largest all-digital bank. And my role essentially is to build content media programs to help Ally bridge the gap between culture and finance with our multicultural consumers. So to me, I'm really excited to be talking about community and culture and things that I'm passionate about and that I get to work on every single day. So from an authenticity perspective, I think from a personal perspective, it's really how do you show up as yourself in every room that you walk into and have the confidence to bring who you are to the table. From a brand perspective, I think it's being real and being genuine to your brand values and who you're serving. I think I've heard a lot of you talk today, a lot of brands get in trouble when you haven't defined those values and then you don't live up to those values every day. It's really hard to show authenticity in the marketplace. Inclusivity, on the other hand, for me, really means to showcase consumers as they truly are and being open to showing voices in spaces that are different from the status quo or the general market. I was reading a study from Deloitte today that just talked about how 71% of Black consumers want to consume media that showcases them on the forefront, in front of the camera, behind the camera. And so being inclusive is really like how do you make sure that you're showing all perspectives in the work that you're doing. So excited to have this conversation today.
All right, so as Rachel mentioned, I'm Lina El-Beshbeeshy, currently Global Brand Director on Papermate at Newell Brands. I am just 2 months in now, so very new to me, but I've been in marketing for over 10 years, 7 years with a couple folks here, and Laura at Georgia Pacific, and then the past 3 years I was at Inspire Brands on Kirby's. When I first found out about the topic for today, I was incredibly excited. As Andrea, I forget how to pronounce her name, mentioned earlier, I have so many things about me that make this near and dear to my heart. I'm a woman, I am Arab/Middle Eastern, whatever you want to call it, I am Muslim, I wear hijab, I am a mom. So think about all the things that inclusivity is incredibly important to me. And as I think about actually my childhood, growing up, my family moved back and forth several times between Egypt, is where my family is originally from, and the US. And growing up, when I was living here in the US, I felt very different from everybody. When I was in Egypt, I felt very different from everybody. And I never really understood where I belonged, who I was. And as a kid, I actually thought the problem was with me, and that I had to be the one who, depending on where I lived, I had to adapt, I had to change who I was in order to quote unquote fit in. And so now, as I reflect back on that, I recognize that the issue wasn't with me, it was with the community, the society I was living in at the time, that inclusivity wasn't important, right? And it was not a thing. It was not a thing that people talked about. It was expected that, people do adapt and just, become, yeah, right, that's right. And so, again, thinking back on that, now, what authenticity means to me is being able to be my true self, my raw self, without, having to apologetically change who I am in order to fit into a group or, get a certain job or be able to be a part of an organization. And then on the flip, in terms of inclusivity, the responsibility to me is on the society, the community, the brand, the organization, whoever we're talking about, the group, to be able to allow the space, the freedom for every single individual to be their authentic self, unapologetically, and being able to help them feel like they are an important part of the group, no matter what their background is, no matter what their perspectives are. So that's kind of what it means to me.
Thanks, Lina. Candace Barnes, so you all have heard from me a little bit already this morning, so I won't really belabor too much of the role, but maybe what I would say is, so I joined the organization last April, so a little bit over a year, and when I joined, it was to lead our DEI and culture team. About 9 months in, maybe, my boss, our CHRO, made the intentional decision to restructure our HR leadership team and pull together talent underneath DEI as well. And so I guess what I would say about that is it allowed to really put a light on that equity word. And so, how do we think about the same things, Lina, you were talking about in that definition of equity and inclusion, right? How do we look at the systems that we have? How do we look at the structures and really allow the work around DEI to blend within? So that's what I've been, I think, most excited about with the role. From a definition standpoint, both Erica and Lina, I think, did a really great job of talking about the definition. Maybe what I would say just personally, on the authenticity side, I feel very much connected to the conversations here around being authentic as feeling as though I can walk into a room and show up as who I am and not necessarily have to adjust. Yes, I'm in corporate, I'm going to be at work, so there's always a little bit of that, but I don't have to not be Candace, right? I can feel as though that I have that space, but also have the awesome responsibility in the role that I have to know that there are people who maybe don't feel like they have a voice. And so how can I lean into creating those spaces? So kind of very similar, but it's taking a little bit of that personal responsibility if I were to kind of flip it a little bit that way. So, pass it.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jwesley here. As it was shared, I have the honor and privilege of being in store experience marketing, specifically focused on our belonging and audience work. And what that means is when many of our diverse guests, when they walk into the store, they actually feel seen, they feel represented. That comes through the form of our in-store marketing, or ISM, our music that select stores here, and even we have a program called Local Art. And so as we think about truly engaging with the community, how can we actually partner with individuals from said community to bring the daily joy or the life in which that community has, and represent that on the store through a permit control. And as we're thinking about the question of authenticity, I actually reflect back on a moment I had with my immediate leader, and I have to be completely honest and say I don't feel myself when I don't have a haircut. And I think when I said that enabled me to truly show up my authentic self at work, because you all know the saying, when you look good, you feel good. And that day I did not look good, and we were having a one-on-one, and I just had to be quite frank. I said, hey, this is where I am, and that is what I bring to work. Vulnerability and openness is what I truly lead by. And as we're thinking about inclusivity, it is embedded in my work. It's when you walk into the store, when I walk into the store, do I personally see myself? And taking the lens of things that are near and dear to me, but then also those that I don't have, that have dimensions of difference. So when you walk into the store, do you see someone with freckles in the photography? Do you see someone that could potentially be an amputee? And like continue to push my team and push my enterprise partners to think differently and think beyond just their regular scope. Because when we walk into the store, of course, we sell more when you see yourself represented in the various forms. And it doesn't help when I get messages or hear my even team members say, I'm dancing down the hallway because of a certain song that they heard in the store. So, yeah.
Awesome, thank you. So the title of this panel is Building Authenticity and Inclusivity from the Ground Up. So what I would love to hear from each of you is, how have you gone about building these teams or strategies from the ground up, either in your current role or past? And Jwesley, since you have the mic, we'll start with you.
First. Fun fact, my role was created by me. I saw that there was an opportunity where I was the most consistent voice in the room, specifically when it came to our multicultural efforts. And so as I continue to grow and build the confidence and continue to show up authentically, I said, hey, there's an opportunity for one voice, not one voice, but one person, especially within the store experience marketing team, to kind of help champion and bring forth inclusivity within our space. And as a result, I've been able to build not only strategies, but true initiatives that will bring inclusivity, diversity, belonging to the forefront and bring those conversations more frequently to my peers and then across the enterprise.
Great question. Maybe where I'll go is something we've done a little bit more recently within the last year. And so as a part of my team, we also have our annual engagement survey. And so with that, we've had a decent amount of change over the last few years. A couple of years ago, we partnered with a new vendor to be able to help us bring that to life. So we just got a little bit of newness and freshness that's happening there. One of the things that we wanted to operationalize a little bit better was, how do we think about, okay, what are we going to go do with all of that information afterwards? But then also we wanted to create space for people to feel as though they could be a part of it. And so something we created is called the Culture Board. And so what it did is it allowed for us to have space and nominees across the different functions in the organization to, one, work really closely with their executive leader and HR team within that group, but also be a little bit of the voice of that team, right? Here's what we learned, here's some of the actions that we perhaps might recommend, and how do we lean in from that perspective. So more kind of an internal team member perspective, but we really intentionally wanted it to not be the leaders within the organization that were a part of this group, so that voices more broadly could be heard. So kind of similarly, just you think of some of the concepts around your IRGs where you have specific groups where you want to be able to elevate those voices, understand what's happening, kind of a similar concept with our annual engagement survey.
Awesome. So for me, as I think about kind of the team that I work with and lead, and thinking about the organization a little bit more broadly, the most important thing to me is the people and the talent within the organization as a whole, right? And being able to say that the team is truly built out from a diverse kind of foundation, right? And so making sure that as you're looking at building out teams, continuing to grow people, making sure that you're having that true representation of that diverse kind of thinking that you want to have in every sense of the term, right? So not just from a demographic perspective and racial and gender and all the things, but even just diverse level of thinking, right? People having different backgrounds, different education, different experiences in life, and making sure that you're capturing all the diversity in thinking. So you start with that building block of who are the people, who's the right talent to make up this group, and then providing that kind of culture in the space, again, as we're talking about, like, allowing people to be their authentic selves and be able to bring that diverse level of thinking to the work. Because at the end of the day, I do wholeheartedly believe, and I think this was a little bit the conversation that Carrie and I had on this topic originally, was until an organization truly lives and breathes inclusivity and authenticity, nothing the organization does will truly be authentic, right? So no matter what kind of marketing you put out into the world, whatever kind of products you develop to try to be more inclusive, until you're authentic and inclusive in everything you do with your own people, I don't think it can ever come off as genuine coming out to the world. So to me, it really, really is truly this whole notion of being from the ground up and truly being at the foundation and the core of the organization. How do they think? How do they appreciate and respect diversity and inclusion before they can, go and tout it out to the world?
So for me, similar to Jwesley, I was the first person on my team. So I built both the team and the strategy from the ground up. Ally had been doing awesome work as it related to the Black community, Hispanic, LGBTQ, but it didn't have an internal champion and it didn't have a leader to kind of set the tone and drive the vision forward. So I created a North Star. It was one of the first things I did was create a North Star and a 3-year plan, just being really realistic about where the organization was, but making steps to know where we should be and how we consistently drive our voice and tone in the marketplace. And then to Lina's point, I think the second thing that was really important to me was building a really strong and solid team and having a team of people who live and breathe culture every single day. That was the most important thing to me, is that I think it's really important to have a community around you who reflects the community that we're serving. So on my team currently, I have people who went to HBCUs, I have people who are LGBTQ+, I have people who are Hispanic, one of the girls on my team is bilingual, bicultural, and so there's not a lot of scenarios that come across our desk that we don't know, and we don't understand, and we don't live and breathe because we're members of the community ourselves. And so that's really important also from an authenticity perspective, is just having that authentic tone of voice in everything we do, partly because it's just who we are in the DNA and fabric of our team. So I really thought that was important with building my team from the ground up.
Amazing, thank you. Okay, so knowing that really it's the brand's responsibility ultimately to focus on being authentic and being inclusive, in your current roles, how do you guys execute on being authentic and inclusive in your day-to-day responsibilities, like kind of taking it a step more granular?
Yeah. So one of the things that I just talked about in building the team was, I think there's probably 80% of the work that you can get from the inside. And to me, the other 20% just comes from living and breathing the culture. And so when you read the insight, we all know trends and data, and that's how we base all of our marketing. And then there's always that gut check moment in terms of how do you make sure that what you're actually putting in the marketplace resonates with consumer and the tone of voice that you want to reflect authentically. So I'll give you an example. One of the first projects when I created our strategy and our vision, and we started looking for partners to build relationships in the marketplace, we came across 2 guys called Earn Your Leisure at the time. So it was a platform of 2 guys who were talking about the capital markets in a way that was really relating to the Black culture and the community. And they were a teeny tiny small podcast. This was about 4 years ago. And had a meeting with them, and immediately I was like, we have to build something really big with these guys, because I could tell just by living and breathing and having a conversation with them that they were so relatable and that they had what it took to make it and become really big in the financial education space. And so 3 years later, they have blown up, they've traveled the world, they have a huge platform, and we are one of their first partners to to come in to start working with them, but it was all because of just building those authentic connections from the ground up. Works so well when you're a member of the community, you can relate to them and they can relate to you. And so now we're in a really big relationship with them where we have pop-up experiences that show up at some of Culture's biggest moments, talking about the capital markets, because obviously Ally is a financial services company, we have the information, but they can bring it to a community that's way more relatable than someone who is in a suit talking about finances. And so how do you begin to support other people who are delivering the same information? So we're a huge partner in working with brands like that. So I also think one of the other things that to me was really important was to work with minority-owned businesses. So we spent a lot of time working with minority-owned media companies. That was a goal that I created super early on in this role, was to make sure that the communities that we serving are really, we're supporting them through funding minority-owned businesses. And we know minority-owned businesses often employ a vast majority of their content producers, or writers and directors are often minority too. So the stories that just come out of these companies and these communities are a lot more authentic. So those are just some of the things I think the way authenticity shows up for me on a day-to-day basis.
Love it, love it. So as I think about my day-to-day, the first thing for me is always making sure that I'm living and breathing what I preach, right? So this idea of I want everyone to be authentic. I expect myself to be authentic and true to myself first and foremost, and making sure that I am setting that example for my team, for the organization, because again, back to this idea of believing that anything that the organization does or puts out into the world cannot be authentic until we're authentic ourselves. I try to set that expectation for myself, live the example, and be an example for others in the organization. And then, as I mentioned, kind of making sure I create the space for the team to be able to be their authentic self and not be, again, apologetic or feeling like they have to adapt or assimilate to any kind of way of thinking or way of speaking, and really, again, being comfortable with being their true selves. From the actual work perspective, I think one of the things that got me most excited about this role is this global aspect. This is the first time in my career that I'm actually getting to work on a truly global brand. And being able to now not only think about what makes sense for the American consumer and who our target is within domestically, but thinking beyond too. And so obviously, as a marketer, the consumer is always at the center of everything that we do. And so now as I think about, innovation pipeline building, marketing strategies, et cetera, I'm not only having to think about my American consumer, and how I think about inclusivity within that aspect. But now I'm also thinking more globally, thinking about those in Europe, those in Africa, those in Eastern Asia. How do I make sure that I'm able to capture the essence of the brand in a way that connects with people from really all different cultures and places in the world. And so a lot of the work that the team has been doing is understanding from a master brand perspective, what are those key things that we know we have to deliver on, and then making sure that as we're developing strategies at a region-specific level, that we're really having a deep understanding of what that culture is in that region, what's most important to them, what are their needs, what are the norms, so that we can make sure that we're inclusive, not alienating, and not, being an American brand just forcing itself into that market, but more so one that understands who they are, what they need, and that we are taking those insights and actually putting them into our plans, our product development, again, on this notion of being inclusive across the globe.
I think this question, I find it a little bit interesting because, and I have to imagine it probably resonates for all of us, so much of our day-to-day, it includes it by default, which I personally feel very blessed that that's the case. And it is I find kind of, from a day-to-day perspective, so much of the topics, the conversations, it does really put head work and heart work together. And so, I resonate a lot with how am I showing up? How am I being authentic? Having that be the tone that's set across the organization around how everyone else should lean in. And so I don't underestimate that, right? Day to day from a role perspective. Some of the ways that I think tangibly that it shows up, from a kind of when I show up at work, what the teams are working on is you've got the people aspect, which I think naturally just comes with the teams that, are part of my overall group. But then you also have, as we're talking around marketing and brand, I think a good example is as we were going after and looking at, who were going to be our new partners from a brand perspective. The brand team had intentionality on wanting to say, Candace, hey, will you come be a part of this process for us as we think of, who we want to select. I think it's the piece you all were mentioning around who are the people that are in the room. So that's just one example of how it shows up day to day. But at a minimum, the four of us, for sure, it's a part of our day to day, but maybe what I'd offer is there's an opportunity for it to be part of everyone's day. So how do you think about ways in which you incorporate that into your day to day? Because the work that we talk around with authenticity and inclusion, none of that work becomes real unless we're all doing it together.
Trying to think of something different. I think everything that they say is true, and it truly does resonate with my line of work. But as I think about my day-to-day role, responsibilities, it's how can I turn my allies into truly accomplices? Because as we're digging into this work, it's not a one-person show. It's not even a two-person show. It's truly changing the culture, changing the mindset of some people that may be hesitant. And so I feel as if I'm on a constant roadshow on inclusivity and diversity within my role, but on the positive side, D&I and this work can be taxing, but it's also leading and being authentic to myself, but then also to those that I'm talking with, of the taxation that could come from this work. And I think coming from a human perspective, so from human to human, like you can empathize with me, I hope, in some form, in some shape, and that has been always been my approach as I approach the day-to-day work. As I mentioned, I lead with openness and vulnerability. I tell you when I'm good, I'll tell you when I'm not. And I think bringing that human side of the work and, of course, grounding everything in data and grounding everything in insights. But we're also talking about people here. And so as we're talking about people, how would you feel if you, in my industry, walk into a store and you didn't see yourself? Would you want to shop there? Would you want to continue to invest your dollars in it? Probably not. And so as I'm talking and as I'm engaging with my cross-channel partners, it's bringing them into that mindset, or more so reminding them of that mindset of we're dealing with people, and we have to show up and be authentic and inclusive in all of our work.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So Candace, I love the point you made about how everybody sitting up here, all of you, four of you, is already ingrained in your day-to-day, but the job is now how do we get everybody thinking about it and working towards this on a daily basis? I think everybody can agree that it's changed a lot, more specifically over the past 40 years when you think about authenticity and inclusivity. So on that topic, how has it changed in the past 40 years from each of your perspectives? Or has it? And if so, what has been the biggest influence of those changes?
That's why you gave me the mic. I think it's an important question. It has changed a lot, and it also hasn't changed a lot, I think. The topic around that we're talking about here, whether it's diversity, whether it's inclusion, authenticity, whatever language you want to use to describe it, I think at the end of the day, Jwesley, you said it well, it's about people. It's a people conversation. So it's been there for a very long time. I think the last 4 years, the overtness, the maybe in your face part of the conversation, the language has changed. There's a lot of ways in maybe how we're talking about it that's become very different. I think over many years, you've always had ebbs and flows around what's comfortable and what's not comfortable talking about in this lane. I guess the piece that I would say is as culture and society has shifted to where things become more in our face, so has DEI. And that's kind of a lot of where we've been over the last 4 years. And maybe where I'll leave it and then pass it along to my fellow panelists to add to the conversation. I think the piece that's in my mind that's come to the forefront is because it is now more in your face, you have the opportunity to see who wants to lean in and perhaps who is a little hesitant. My hope is that opens the door for more conversation in those spaces where people are more hesitant, but the work doesn't stop, and so this continues for several years to come.
Yeah, I think as the past 4 years has been kind of somewhat good to me because that's how my role was created. And then as we think about for me, the unfortunate pendulum that seems to swing when we think about a heightened environment, whether it's racial unrest or it's we're losing dollars, and so what do we need to do to regain market share? And I think as what I'm seeing, many businesses and companies are swinging into business priorities, and unfortunately they have lost track of the imperative nature of inclusivity, and that's where we, for my friends now, we have all come into play in ensuring that it's built in our strategy. And so as we're building strategy, as we're thinking about just overall conversations on inclusivity and the nature of the importance of this work, because the society population is changing, and as we're continuing to think through and think about who the population and what it's turning into, it's becoming more diverse. And if we, and this is something that I constantly, this is from an authentic place, what I tell my leaders, if we don't continue to lean into where culture is going and not have, I guess, a performative nature, if you will, into the business, we will lose. We will continuously be second fiddle, third fiddle, and we will not be in a place or position in which we desire or in which we want to be in.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously the past 4 years have been crazy for all of us as just human beings, and I loved what you said early, Jwesley, of this idea of empathy, right? Whether or not you associate with, like personally, with certain groups, certain ideologies, whatever whatever it is, having that level of empathy and humanity to just understand what it is like to experience what a certain group might be experiencing, to me, starts as step one, right? And so what has been going on in the past 4 years, I think we've finally gotten to a point where, is it 100%? No, but we're definitely getting to a point where more of the mainstream population is at a minimum becoming exposed to a lot of these real topics that have been an issue in our society for a long time. And so exposure, but then also starting to really understand what it's like having that level of empathy. Because without that, it's very difficult, again, on this idea of authenticity and genuineness, to be able to actually want to make a change, a fundamental change in how our society thinks and behaves. And so, as I look back on 4 years, it's been amazing to see, to your point, the language has changed, the narrative has changed. Has the actual hard data changed? Probably not. But I feel like it's finally like the momentum is going. And so why, again, I love this topic of like from the ground up. It just feels like it's one of those things, it's gonna have to be like grassroots. It's gonna have to be like all of us in this room to actually like bring it in our day-to-day, like be our authentic selves first and foremost, expect others to be their authentic selves. And until that actually happens where, you know, the masses are actually living and breathing this stuff, can actual organizations now as broader entities actually make these bigger changes. Because, you know, data points that we talk about as like, you know, who was saying earlier in the Fortune 500 like executive level leadership, like you don't see the level of diversity that you see in the US population, right? And that's, we all know it's gonna take years, but again, it's like this idea from the ground up and us holding these expectations of our, you know, executive leaders over time, like as the conversation keeps going and we force it to keep going, then we can finally, you know, see some change, hopefully in the near future.
Yeah, so I'll build a little bit on what you're saying, Lina, from a marketing perspective. So I think that the conversations have certainly increased in the past 4 years. We're definitely seeing DE&I at the forefront, just understanding what's going on in communities of color being exposed and talked about at a much more increased level than we've ever seen it in society, which is awesome. But on the flip side, when you do look at the data and the numbers, as a marketing community, we haven't made a ton of changes in terms of what's actionable, right? So if you look at Super Bowl ads this year, in terms of people in front of the camera, behind the camera, not a ton of change. When you look at investment of minority-owned media companies, I think there was probably 1% being invested in minority-owned media companies in 2020. If you look at today, it's probably 1.2%. And so the pendulum is swinging very, very slowly. And so the conversation is there, the community is there. I think consumers are demanding or are asking for change. And as the generations get younger and younger, you do see the need for wanting to change. But as a marketing community, I do think that we're probably more of the same than change over the past 4 years.
Thank you. How are we doing on time? Do we have time for one more question? We're good? Okay. Okay, so last question. So what are your recommendations for brands that are looking to authentically connect with multicultural consumers?
Yeah, I think that was a great segue into finishing the point. I definitely think it takes having people who understand the communities and the perspective to have a seat at the table is really important. I think Candace said that this is hard work, and we all are blessed to get to do this on a day-to-day basis, but it's definitely difficult work when you're in organizations and you're either starting a team from the ground up or you're the new person at the table and you have to be a champion for something that may be polarizing on either side. It is difficult, and so I think, just having allies in the organization, not letting the multicultural person or diversity person be the only one talking about this stuff. When you're in meetings with your colleagues, chiming up and supporting the position, or at least looking to learn more about the perspective so that that person doesn't feel like they have to carry the weight of this work on their back, because it is truly a weight that you have to carry every single day.
Totally, I'm 100% with you. And kind of going back to this idea too of, again, from the ground up, right? Like making sure that your teams are representative of, our society and the market that we're playing in. And I recognize not everybody can, bring on completely new teams tomorrow, but then putting in the extra effort then to make sure that you're incorporating all the different perspectives so that it is genuine and authentic. So whether it's like, your classic consumer research and making sure you're capturing all the different perspectives, but you can get creative and even if, you might not have the diverse level of thinking on your direct marketing team, look broader in your organization, right? most of our organizations are pretty large, you've got lots of cross-functional teams. How do you get those different perspectives from the operations folks, from supply chain, from sales, people who might be, closer into this cultural thinking that you're trying to make sure you truly deeply understand, again, so that it does come off as genuine and authentic. And not come off, it is genuine and authentic.
Let's see, what can I add? I think thinking internally around the teams, I 100% agree with that, is, who are the folks that you have that are a part of, especially those big decisions or big conversations. But not only look at who, but what is the environment that you're fostering. I think, Lina, you were mentioning that a little bit as well, right? How do you make sure that no matter who is there at the table, what's the space that you're creating, what are the conversations that you're having? And then maybe the last piece I'd leave you with is just think about, it can be very daunting to think about what do I go do? What action can I take? Just find one thing, find one thing that you feel like you could action on, you could do something with. If we all found one thing, imagine what that could look like.
I guess I'll go back to my allies to accomplices. As we truly are continuing to move forward with this work, it is how do we get everyone in the trenches? Because unfortunately we are one person. We can't be in every room, neither can our team members or teammates be in every room. And so how can we continue to enable them with resources, with tools, with the courage to even say, I don't know, or let me help and go to someone that does know, but then also to continue to think about that in their own strategy, in their own business practices, and continue to drive work forward, because there's more, and as we think about it, as they think about it, it can then become embedded. And I think even earlier, it's how do you even add this to KPI metrics? Because everyone wants to tie something to a dollar, and how do we truly build that into your strategy? And as a result, I think it can continue to grow and become a part of the business.
Awesome. Thank you, Jwesley, Candace, Lina, Erica. Thank you so much for sharing your unique perspective. Thank you to brand Innovators and to Papa John's for allowing us to have this conversation. With that, we'll turn it over to the Women in Marketing panel.